How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
This episode is brought to you by Chevrolet. Chevy certified service technicians are factory trained to fit your vehicle with the tires specifically developed for it. And with our tire price match guarantee, you get the best fit for the best deal. Let us do the work. Available on select eligible tire brands at participating dealers only. Offer ends 12/31/2025. Terms apply. See dealer for complete details. Visit Chevrolet.com/service to learn more.
Of course you love a pint of Ben & Jerry's, but maybe you don't love sharing your pint of Ben & Jerry's. No problem. Now you can share the love with Ben & Jerry's new Scoop-A-Palooza. 28 whole ounces of crowd-pleasing flavor in a single tub. It's an instant ice cream party. And if that means your favorite pint is left just for you, so be it. Ben & Jerry's new 28-ounce Scoop-A-Palooza. Made for sharing in 4 larger-than-life flavors. See benjerry.com/palooza.
After more than 5 months away, the House of Commons returned this past week. We had the election of a speaker. We had the King read the speech from the throne. Donald Trump insert himself back into Canadian politics. And Mark Carney make his maiden speech and appearance in question period in the House of Commons. Hello and welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. And to break down what we saw, what we witnessed, what matters, and what comes next, two great colleagues who know and understand politics quite well. Stuart Thomson is the Ottawa Bureau Chief, the Parliamentary Bureau Chief for National Post, and John Ivison is a longtime political watcher, no longer constrained by the cold, damp weather of Ottawa. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me today. How are you?
All good. Thank you, Brian.
Great, Brian.
I said that, in order of what happened, we elected a new speaker and all of that, but we'll get to the speaker. The important thing, I guess, really was the King delivering the speech from the throne. Here's a clip.
It has been nearly 70 years since the Sovereign first opened Parliament. In the time since, Canada has dramatically changed, repatriating its constitution, achieving full independence, and witnessing immense growth.
So if you paid attention to the election, you knew what the contents were. There was not a lot new in it. Was there the whole idea of having the King deliver the speech as some sort of message to Trump, a show of Canadian sovereignty? Do either one of you think that worked, that bore out?
I do. I think the message was received in Washington. I mean, the coverage of a Canadian throne speech abroad normally would have been, a nanosecond, and it got coverage. There was, I read pieces in the Washington Post and elsewhere. So this was noted. It was more about the speaker than the speech in many ways. I think it was probably helpful to the royal family as well, frankly. Keir Starmer had been in the White House and had refused to defend Canada in the face of all these annexation threats. He had then said, oh, by the way, Donald Trump's coming for a second state visit to Britain. I mean, in the wake of that, the royal family was in something of disrepute in Canada. As the polls showed, there was an Angus Reid poll showed that the majority of people are not in favour of the monarchy in the long term. So I think this did Canada some good. It did the monarchy some good. And I think from the Carney government's point of view, it reinforced this idea that this is a different government than Justin Trudeau's.
Stuart?
Yeah, and I think domestically is an interesting question. And I know I run the risk of being a little bit Ottawa-brained with this take, but I really enjoyed the pomp and the circumstance. And it was nice to see a kind of big event in Ottawa. And my kids went out and met the King and Queen. And it just felt like maybe this is still a kind of pandemic thing where it's just nice to have a big event happen in Ottawa. And I think it was a really smart move by Carney to do this. Whether or not the message was received internationally, I think it probably was. I agree with John. But even if it wasn't, I think domestically it probably was a win for Carney in general.
I agree with you on the pomp and circumstance. I used to love events like the speech from the throne or a new governor general being sworn in, the return of all these things are wonderful, and there's great tradition among them. And we've all been lucky in our jobs that we get to see them up close. But is there still a connection to the monarchy? Is it still a thing in this country? Because it appears to have been waning. We went through almost a decade of a government that, would pay lip service to it, but really wasn't interested. We led by a guy who called us a post-national state, no core identity, genocidal, all these things. CBC, by the way, cheered along with him for that whole decade, and then was suddenly all about the king when he was here. So has the connection been watered down by both a previous government that didn't care, huge immigration levels from countries that don't have that connection? Is it still there?
I think, it's a good question, but this poll that came out suggested that in every region of the country, people reject the idea that Canada should continue as a constitutional monarchy for generations to come. Nationally, only 30% said yes, against 46% said no. So clearly there is a waning of that, because that number is lower than it has been in the past. But I think this is a government that is intent on reviving transatlantic relations, not just with the UK, but with France and other European partners. And clearly, Carney spent a lot of time in Britain. He has a personal connection with Charles, obviously, as you could see when he was talking to him. His brother works in Prince William's household. This is going to be a bigger thing for the Carney government than it was for the Trudeau government. And I do think there is still...
Perhaps even than the Harper government.
Well, the Harper government was pretty keen on it. Jason Kenney would have the Queen's portrait in every office that he had. I think that events like this and visits like this do revive that sense of tradition and history. I remember somebody thought it would be a great joke to send me to cover Prince William and Kate when they came on their state visit, and I've trekked around the country following them as a Scotsman, sort of lukewarm to the monarchy. And I ended up declaring that I'd surrendered. I laid down my sword and felt that on balance it was a good thing. And I think, of all those people, if you rephrase that question and said, on balance, do you think the monarchy is a good thing? Should we become a republic? You would not get 30% against 46%. You would get probably the reverse.
So basically you washed off the blue paint, stopped yelling freedom from atop your horse.
Yes. I was...
I call myself a reluctant monarch often because similar background, except we're Irish Catholics. We have even less desire to love the monarchy. But, to Churchill's quote about democracy is the worst form of government except all the others, what would we do if we, decided to leave the monarchy? I can imagine them appointing a blue ribbon panel of academics coming up with the worst constitution you could ever find, a constitution by committee, and then we would literally become the Soviet Socialist Republic of Kanakistan.
Yeah, I will. That poll that John was talking about, I just want to point out that even people who like the monarchy, half of them don't think it should do anything, and it's just this really funny. It's a weird thing. And I thought Ben Woodfin, who's actually Pierre Poilievre's former director of communications, wrote a good piece in the National Post about just the weirdness of a monarchy. It should be hard to explain why we need this. And I think you can sort of see this in every aspect of life. We always like to have a totem. We always have to have some kind of anchor like this. And you could kind of see that. The display of the king sitting on a throne, with the gold outline, is a little odd in today's day and age, but it's weirdly appealing.
Well, I think I said in the column I wrote on the day that there's an inherent absurdity to the whole event. The monarch or his representative reciting a prepared speech written by somebody else. It's not his words, so what does it matter who says it? But despite all of that, I think it worked. There was just a sense of this is what makes us different, if not unique, from the United States.
Okay, so we sent a message to Washington, specifically to Donald Trump, by having King Charles III and Queen Camilla appear in Ottawa and read the speech. He sent a message back because on Truth Social at 5:41 p.m. Eastern Time on the day of the throne speech being read, he wrote and posted, "I told Canada, which very much wants to be part of our fabulous Golden Dome system, that it will cost $61 billion if they remain a separate but unequal nation, but will cost $0 if they become our cherished 51st state. They are considering the offer." Stuart, that was a kind of a shot back, wasn't it, from Trump?
It's just trolling. That's really all this is. And since the beginning of the year, we've had to make, you've had to make them too, I bet, Brian, where you have to decide, is this real? Is this something we cover? Is this part of a negotiation? Is he setting something up for later? Or is this just a dumb tweet? And I think that is always the question with Trump. And who knows? I mean, the Canadian government isn't going to show its hand or lose its leverage if there is some kind of negotiation going on. So they kind of have to let these things stand sometimes with sort of, maybe, a couple of lines of denial about how we won't do this. But I think this is just the thing you have to endure as a Canadian government while Trump's in power.
We'll get to the value or lack thereof of the Golden Dome system, the missile defense system that he's proposing in a minute. But, John, your thoughts on the message. Was that Trump trying to say, yeah, but I'm still living in your head rent-free. I'm still here.
Well, what could you say? I mean, the U.S. ambassador to Canada had just come out and said, nobody's talking about the 51st state. And then,
Poor Pete.
Trump just leaves him hanging. So, I think it's going to continue. It's great for the government because it validates everything Carney said during the election. And, we've had columns since then saying, peace has been declared. Were you hyping up the threat during the election? And then suddenly Trump appears again. He's not giving up on this thing. So, great for the government.
Okay, before we leave the speech from the throne, let's talk about the Peter Pan peacock that appeared in the form of Justin Trudeau with his green and orange suede gazelle Adidas running shoes. I've heard from Liberals who were annoyed at this because they felt it was Trudeau taking the attention away from King Charles, from the new Carney government, by saying, "Ha, look at me, I'm still here. Forget my socks. Now look at my shoes." You can't make too much of it. It's a serious event, and that's an unserious statement, what he did. But it did feel like maybe, after that great piece by Chris Nardi on how Mark Carney expects people to dress professionally, that was Justin Trudeau's way of saying, yep, to heck with you, Mark Carney. You can't tell me how to dress, and I'm never growing up.
Well, I had heard this rumor, which I have not confirmed, but there was something doing the rounds that people were expected to wear black dress shoes in government. Now, whether this came from the top or wherever it came from, but and that this was Justin's not so subtle rebuttal to that. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I mean, I remember seeing it and going, that can't be right. And then the camera came back round again, and it is right. Like, what statement is he making there?
Well, I first, what about you, Stuart? I first saw photos on X, and I'm thinking, oh, come on, that's got to be AI. People are taking the piss with us here. This can't be true. But it is.
The easiest wins for Carney so far have been just the sort of, superficial stuff about being serious. Like, you have to be here on time. We're going to have actually organized cabinet meetings. I'm going to dress in a suit and I'm going to answer questions seriously. And that has been the contrast that Carney has really exploited is, we're here to do an actual serious job, kind of implying that Trudeau government was either never serious or it had moments of deep unseriousness, which I think a lot of the disapproval numbers were pointing to with Trudeau. And I think if you're Carney, as much as it is kind of annoying to see a guy in green shoes at the speech from the throne, it is good for him to keep that contrast going, because the contrast with Trudeau, I think, is a huge benefit to Carney.
Well,
can I just talk on that, Brian? I was going to say that, what the speech was really about was about this, what he called a fundamentally different approach to governing, and focusing on these 7 priorities. Now, we can argue about whether he's ever going to achieve them or whether there's enough specifics yet later on, but, they're pretty clearly spelled out, and they're primarily economic. The barriers to interprovincial trade coming down, making housing more affordable, spending less on government operations, etc. I look back at the 2021 throne speech. Trudeau's focus was on government-mandated vaccines, fighting climate change, capping oil and gas emissions, increasing the carbon tax, mandating the sale of electric vehicles, strengthening gun control, equity, justice and diversity, fighting systemic racism, etc., etc., etc. I mean, these are many of the reasons that the country is so divided today, and none of these things got airplay, or certainly not as part of the 7 main priorities in this new government.
So that does tie into the piece by Chris Nardi that I mentioned earlier. And I read the piece beginning to end, fascinated, going, okay, this is really interesting. But then I got to the end, and I had people sending it to me saying, isn't this great? Wow, Mark Carney's punctual. And by the time I got to the end, I was like, wait a minute. Should we be happy or excited about this? Shouldn't this just be expected? But that's how much Trudeau lowered the bar, as I said in my column. We're now elated that the top elected official in the country expects results. That should be the bare minimum. Shouldn't it, John?
Yeah, I think so. But I think, I think all of us on this podcast have been calling out for years for the things that he's now talking about doing, productivity. I mean,
I'm not taking away from Mark Carney here. But it doesn't that speak to
I think
how we were conditioned to expect so little from
there was a reason why
Trudeau.
The Trudeau government ended up at 16% in the polls. People just got fed up with this nonsense.
Stuart?
Well, yeah, I mean, we were just thinking about last fall, because I was quite happy to have the House reopened, and I went to question period, Carney's first question period. It was really fun just to be back there, but it reminded me of how bad the House got last fall when it was basically closed because the government just didn't have the will to break that logjam, which they could have done.
The Green Slush Fund scandal, they wouldn't release the documents.
The question of privilege. There's a few ways they could have done it. They could have released the documents, or they could have worked with the NDP to break the logjam, but they didn't. And it just kind of spoke to this really exhausted government that didn't have any ideas left, didn't have any sort of innovative staffers left who were thinking outside the box. They were just sort of grinding away. And it's great for Carney because the contrast in just being normal and halfway competent is pretty huge.
Okay, he did make an appearance in question period this week. Here he is answering the very first question, not asked by Pierre Poilievre, but by that blast from the past, Andrew Scheer.
Mr. Speaker, our tariffs have maximum impact on the United States, minimum impact on Canada, and we are dedicating all the revenues from those tariffs to supporting the workers and businesses affected by the unjustified American actions. Hear, hear.
So first thing I noticed, gents, and wrote about it in a column, my colleague Brian Pastfume wrote about it for The Sun in a news piece, is, well, he's quickly learned the old adage, it's not answer period, it's question period. He gave responses, didn't give answers. I mean, I was really unsure, and I shouldn't be anymore. He is adapting to politics quickly, and quite well, I have to say. I may not like where he's going with everything, but he obviously has figured out how to play the game. Obviously the pressure will mount later on, but he has adapted to politics quite quickly, I would say, with his performance in question period and everywhere else. John?
Yeah, I think, I've known him a long time, and when his name first came up, the Michael Ignatieff comparison was always raised. And I never really bought that. And I probably maybe even said it on this podcast some time ago. Ignatieff, politics just wasn't him. It didn't come naturally to him. He would be exhausted by crowds. If you read his sort of political post-mortem, he wrote a book about it called Fire and Ashes, which is brutally honest about how it wasn't suited to it. Carney is much more suited to it. He feeds off people. He enjoys talking to people. I think something like Question Period, he's mastered the not mastered it, he's adapted to the performative side of politics much better than anybody expected him to. I mean, during the election campaign, he didn't love these photo ops. He nearly sawed his fingers off in some factory or other. But he did like the playing hockey with the kids and stuff like that. And this is a totally different world than being a central bank governor, obviously. So I think he's done pretty well. I think your comment, though, about the pressure is now going to be on him, that's where I would like to go next as far as talking about things. We're already starting to see some signs of disappointment in what he's about to do.
Well, let's get to that after the break. We'll keep talking for another minute or so, but I'll ask you before I go to Stuart on how he's doing. I'm sure you've seen the video. We don't have the context for it, but it's someone up in the gallery recording him as Melanie Joly comes over to speak, and he doesn't even look at her. He just gives the dismissive hand gesture. Maybe he's not being dismissive, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on the fact that he's in the most photographed video environment in Canada. And whether he was being dismissive or not, it'll be taken that way. And he's got to learn to watch himself in those situations.
Yeah, I saw that video. I mean, Mark is a guy who prepares. I don't know when that video was taken, whether it was before Question Period, but you can be sure that whatever briefing notes were being given him, he was absorbing them, and probably no time for distractions. I think there are going to be a lot more stories like this where he is quite dismissive of people who he maybe doesn't quite have time for. So
I've already heard of him blasting people, including his chief of staff, coming in to talk to him who aren't prepared.
Yeah,
who don't know the file.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be there, to be honest.
Stuart, your thoughts on his performance so far and on that video?
Yeah, well, I was a writer who was hoping to write the Mark Carney has a difficult week in the House piece this week, and I wasn't quite able to write that piece because he didn't. It was
there is no way to say that he had anything but a very good week.
Yeah, we had heard in that piece by Chris Nardi, the people around him were worried that he doesn't quite understand how the House works, and he's kind of assuming things will be smoother there than he realizes. But I went to QP kind of hoping for a stumble or something to kind of latch a piece onto, and it didn't really happen. And you saw the contrast with Tim Hodgson, who is also a new guy, also a Goldman Sachs veteran, who had a rough go in Question Period where he was kind of holding his notes and his hand was shaking a little bit. And it just was the classic newbie first response in QP moment. But Carney was fine. He handled it like he'd been there for years. And I think that is kind of the vibe we're getting from him, is that he is ready for this stuff. He's coming in prepared.
He's not a complete neophyte to parliamentary life, though. I mean, he's appeared many times at committees, and as Governor of the Bank of England during Brexit, that was an incredibly political position. He was somewhat dragged into it. He said things at parliamentary committees in England that made clear he was not a fan of Brexit, and that made him put a target on his back. But he was, I mean, the day after Brexit, Cameron resigned, and Carney was the guy who came out and gave the speech saying, everything's going to be okay, folks. This is not a guy who is like Hodgson, who is entirely new to public life.
But in last comment before we take a break, would you have expected him to look as at ease as he did? To Stuart's point, John, he looked like he'd been there for years.
He is a very relaxed guy. I think that masks the fact that preparation allows him to feel relaxed. He's not going into it completely cold, but I think he works at, you make your own luck. He works at this stuff, and then makes it look relatively easy.
All right, we'll take a quick break, then we'll come back and talk about where John wanted to go. Pressure is on. Back in moments.
Hi, this is Joe from Vanta. In today's digital world, compliance regulations are changing constantly, and earning customer trust has never mattered more. Vanta helps companies get compliant fast and stay secure with the most advanced AI, automation, and continuous monitoring out there. So whether you're a startup going for your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001, or a growing enterprise managing vendor risk, Vanta makes it quick, easy, and scalable. And I'm not just saying that because I work here. Get started at Vanta.com.
Jif peanut butter. It's that jiffing good, it doesn't really need advertising. So instead, enjoy the calming sounds of the ocean. Jif. Ooh, it's that jiffing good. Get your Jif at Jif.com.
Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original, which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
This is Tristan Hopper, the host of Canada Did What?, where we unpack the biggest, weirdest, and wildest political moments in Canadian history you thought you knew and tell you what really happened. Stick around at the end of the episode to hear a sample of one of our favorite episodes. If you don't want to stick around, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get podcasts.
Any job comes with pressure. Mark Carney in a job with a lot of pressure, although is it more than he had before with Bank of England? I don't know. John, you wanted to talk about the pressure mounting. He's made a lot of promises. I said in a piece this week that he's got to stand and deliver. Like the speeches are done. The campaigning's done. Now he's got to stand and deliver. A piece from Canadian Press shows that he may be ready to deliver by Monday. We're not sure if as we record here on Friday afternoon, we're not sure if the First Minister's meeting will actually happen in person because of the wildfires and the state of emergency in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. But CP got their hands on a document showing that they are ready to allow certain projects of national interest to skirt C69. The opposition wants them to get rid of it. A lot of industry wants them to get rid of it, but they're at least saying, we'll come up with a way to deliver these projects. I had said at the beginning, he's got to deliver something for the premiers, and it looks like he's set to.
Yeah, I think that probably is the big thing on Carney's mind right now, is that something has to be approved. You've got to do something. You've made a lot of big promises. You've said you want to build, baby, build. And actually, in a minority government, you don't have a lot of time to do it. Like we're talking about the fast-tracked approval being 2 years as opposed to 5. So that doesn't leave a lot of room to show results to premiers and to Canadians. So I expect they'll come out of this meeting with something big. And I think we are. I would encourage people to check out a piece by Stephanie Taylor, just sort of showing the lists from all the provinces. She did actually literally call around the country to every province and say, what's your list of projects that you want Carney to approve? And there were some good ones with some good projects. Alberta's, though, I think shows you the challenge that Carney has to deal with, which is that they want Northern Gateway, which is a pipeline that would be difficult, I think, to approve, but isn't a crazy idea. And then the other were things that were just not what Carney was looking for. One was repeal Bill C-69. And that might be a noble goal, but it's not a national project like Carney was asking for. So there is a little bit of politics going on here. And I think if you're Mark Carney, you were probably hoping for good faith from all the provinces. And I don't know if that's exactly what he'll get.
One thing that's going to be difficult for Mark Carney to deliver on, John, is he's talked about reining in spending. A couple of things on that. Canadian Taxpayers Federation came out with a piece showing we got 38% more federal employees than we did 8 years ago under Justin Trudeau. Population's only grown 15%. And spending is still up. The main estimates, Mark Carney's going around talking about keeping spending to 2%. And the main estimates that were just tabled have it at 8%. That's a world of difference. And the Conservatives quickly latched onto that. He walked past it during question period, but he can't walk past it in terms of delivering on his promises.
Yeah, I thought the estimates were interesting because they are not the whole picture. Obviously, you have supplementary estimates later in the year, and at some point we'll have a budget. But they are this is the rubber hitting the road. This is concrete spending plans by the government, by government departments looking for Parliament's approval to spend. So this is not notional ideas in a Liberal platform that were not written.
It's not a press release.
No, it's not a press release. It's and you know, we may or may not see all the things that were in the Liberal platform, but this is actual spending plans. In those plans, the 130 departments plan to spend $26 billion on consultants, professional services. You're right.
Why'd we hire all those extra bureaucrats?
Well, exactly. I mean, both of them are going through the roof. As you said, the spending compared to the main estimates last year is up 7.75% to $487 billion. There were no signs of the restraint which Carney had talked about. He talked about the operational side of this budget rising at 2% a year instead of 9% a year and being balanced within 3 years. On the evidence of these estimates, that is going to be very hard to do. So unless we see a major course correction in the budget, which I think we're going to have to, I mean, there's going to have to be some sign in the budget that this government is starting to cut operational spending if it's going to hit the targets that it said it was going to hit.
Okay, I want to play another clip for you of Mark Carney talking about this in his speech in reply to the speech from the throne. It's a weird, convoluted thing, but here he is talking about the past government spent too much. He's going to do it differently.
We will spend less on government operations so Canadians can invest more to build Canada strong. Day-to-day government spending, the government's operating budget, has been growing by an unsustainable 9% every year. We will bring that rate down to 2%, less than half the average nominal rate of growth in the economy.
So he's critical of the past government spending too much, and he is basically in line with what they're doing. How does he square that other than, I'm new, I just got here, I haven't had a chance to pull anything back?
Well, if I can just say one more thing on that. I mean, you know, clearly this government has not had a chance to do a line-by-line spending review.
Mm-hmm.
The estimates have to come out. So maybe they've just said, well, let's let the bureaucracy do what they want, sign off on it, and we'll correct it all in a budget. But it's kind of odd. You know, I counted up the departments. There were something like 63 departments that will see their budgets rise beyond the rate of inflation, and only 14 will have their budgets cut. You know, the National Capital Commission, for example, will see its allocated spending rising to $179 million this year from $94.7 in the main estimates last year. It's not clear how much of any of this is capital spending or operational spending, because that's not easily broken out. But they've sent the message out that this is business as usual. The bureaucracy has basically filled its boots and increased operational budgets in every single department, more or less. That seems to me to be very odd for a government that has said it's going to do things differently.
Stuart, will they be able to turn this around by September? Do you think they have that ability?
It is a hard job. You should talk to people who were involved in the Harper spending review, which I think was generally seen as successful. Like, it was a pretty well-run program. It was tough for the bureaucracy to find those cuts. But there is a political element to it, because you know you're going to have the unions coming after you, and you know you're going to have voters distressed by it a little bit. Everyone in the Conservative Party in this election was talking about Tim Hudak, the Ontario PC leader, who announced those big cuts and took a real political hit for it during the election
said
campaign.
He'd lay off 100,000 people,
yeah.
And then before the election even started.
And conservatives nowadays will use that as a lesson for why they don't want to do 3% cuts. Like, it's maybe they're over-learning the lesson, but maybe that's also when you have a leader who's in trouble in his Carleton riding, you don't want to do stuff like that. But it is really hard, and I don't think we should underestimate how hard that is, because as you can see from what's happening right now, and from what happened in the Trudeau years, the bureaucracy on autopilot will grow. And that's its natural state, and restraint, even just neutral growth, is hard, and cutting it is even harder. So that will be a multi-year challenge for Carney.
Well, as I was writing on Friday about the spending and the growth and the bureaucracy, as I'm sitting there typing away, on my TV comes Elon Musk in his final press conference as a special government employee from the Oval Office with Donald Trump. And I thought, well, he's got a Canadian passport. We could ask him to come do the Canadian Department of Government Efficiency. And a lot of Canadians might laugh at the idea of a Canadian DOGE. But whether it was Stephen Harper's spending review or Paul Martin's spending review, we have done this sort of thing before. And it's important to do because otherwise you end up with parts of the government operating that people don't realize things are still going on. And maybe the program that you established 20 years ago, you don't really need it anymore. But John, you know this, it just keeps going and people show up to work or work from home and the money keeps getting spent.
Yeah, well, I think it's clear we're going to be spending much more on the military. And it looks clear we're going to be spending much more on housing and policing and the border and other things. I mean, these are non-negotiable. And if you're going to at least bring the debt to GDP level down, then something's got to give. And there are no signs as yet that anything's giving.
John Manley used to say he had to move spending from low priorities to high priorities. Right now, as you said, the government's on autopilot. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They haven't had a chance to turn this around yet. But everything is a priority and everything's getting more money. How do you wrestle that down, Stuart?
Well, I'll make a quick point about DOGE, which I think it's a really salient example of these are guys. Elon Musk is a guy who didn't fully comprehend the political incentives that were at play. And he's got a kind of technocratic brain where he thought we can cut these things and people will thank us for our hard work. But that's not how it works. There are political stakeholders here who will always have a say, and they're going to cause controversies. So, if you are looking at the cuts that happen in Canada, the Harper ones and the Martin ones, the situation had to come to a crisis point for those to happen. For Martin, it was the budgetary crisis. And for Harper, they were in the wake of the financial crisis in 2008-09. So they had a lot of deficit spending. They wanted to calm down. And I don't think we're in a moment like that right now. So it is a tough lift for this government.
John, you mentioned that we're obviously going to be spending more money on the military. Let's go to the Golden Dome. $61 billion. We haven't said no to it. The chief of the defense staff has said she's open to it. This is something to consider. I think right now, given the political and economic situation, going along with the Americans on defense issues is probably a smart political move and just the right thing to do at the moment. Might be controversial with some Canadians, but probably the right thing to do.
Well, I think, I've been writing about ballistic missile defense going back since God was a boy. I mean, when did it come up? Paul Martin, 2005. And I thought at the time there it was a no-brainer. We should absolutely get involved with it. But it was pretty early days then. And I think it's pretty early days with this thing because I have no objection to Canada being involved. I think defending the North is absolutely what we should be doing. But this thing does not look like it works. It looks like it's never going to work. I mean, I don't know if anybody's read the sort of technical specs, but, the chances of knocking hypersonic missiles out of midair are apparently non-existent. So I think we've got to be careful about throwing money after bad if this system is just not going to work.
Well, when Israel developed the Iron Dome, and that's a much smaller geographic area, what is it, the size of New Jersey, and we're looking at the vastness of North America, people thought that wouldn't work. And eventually it did. Houthis got a missile through and it struck the airport. The Iron Dome was successful.
They're not firing hypersonic missiles.
I know. There is a world of difference, but it did take some effort to get there. And so perhaps this will work, perhaps it won't, but I think we should probably politically, Stuart, at the time being, be saying to the Americans, yes, sure, we'll work with you.
Yeah, I think that is what the Carney government's plan is to sort of rag the puck and not look like they're just saying no. But I agree with John, the Golden Dome, I mean, the name does not inspire confidence. It sounds like a bad Chinese restaurant. And it's not like the Iron Dome. It sounds actually intimidating. But the price tag of like the ultimate price tag in the hundreds of billions of dollars and the likelihood of success, which I'm not an expert in this, but I've read experts who seem to have a low opinion of that likelihood. And then the likelihood of this becoming a sort of militarization of space, because that's the only way to get these hypersonic missiles, is, I think, a little concerning for everyone. And I think the only thing that maybe gives you a little bit of solace is that it has all the earmarks of a Trump fantasy that, in 3 years from now, it won't be anything anyways.
There is talk still, including from the new prime minister, about reviewing the F-35 contract. As we join this rearm Europe, I would not be against us buying, the Saab jets, from Sweden. I wouldn't be against buying those, but canceling any part of the F-35 contract, I think, is a foolish move. Both for the politics of it, I think we would face economic punishment, but also because our military, our Air Force needs these jets, and they need them sooner rather than later. We should be flying them already. The jets that we have in service now first came on board when Jack and Diane by John Cougar Mellencamp was a new song. That's how old they are. I don't think angering the Americans and leaving our troops with equipment that old is a good idea. But, I actually like the idea of saying, no, let's buy 30 or 40 of these Saab jets. We needed more than the 88 F-35s than we bought. And there really shouldn't be a problem running two different fleets. I know there's a bit of extra maintenance costs, but it shouldn't be an issue. What are your thoughts, guys?
I think that we're committed to buying, 16 in the first tranche of the 88 that we've ordered. That seems to me to be a done deal. We're not going to renege on that. But the suggestion that we have a mixed fleet using with either Saab jets or French jets, I think is possible. Talking to people who know about this stuff, there are good reasons why you would have F-35s. It's a generational shift in air power, advanced capabilities. All the allies are getting them. So you would have, a bunch of these planes dotted around the place, but we might not need 88 of them. And given the price tag rise, the idea that we would buy the French Dassault Rafale or the Eurofighter Typhoon or the Saab Gripen seems to be in line with what Carney's talking about when he's talking about diversifying away from U.S. suppliers, because Saab would build the jet in Canada using IMP Aerospace of Halifax.
This is not Carney's fault because he was nowhere near Canada at the time, but the fact that Trudeau canceled the existing F-35 contract cost us tons of jobs. And you hear the Prime Minister now say, we're sending 8 out of 10 capital dollars from the military to the U.S. The way that the Harper government structured it, our companies couldn't just bid on supplying parts for the jets we were buying. We could bid for the entire supply chain, and some of them were. And then once we got out of it, well, you can't, if you're not part of the project, you can't bid, you can't supply it. So we lost out a huge amount for our aerospace industry as a result of that daft political decision.
This would be a way around that. I mean, the Portuguese cancelled the whole thing. This would be a way around that. You stay in the program, but you maybe don't order 88 of them. You have a mixed fleet of, one suggestion was that you could order 45 F-35s and 120 Gripens for the same price that we're paying now.
Yeah, well, I get an allergic reaction when I hear about canceling contracts like this, because it can be so frustrating to get these things moving again. And I'll tell you, when I was at the hub, we did this exercise where we took the money that you would have to spend to get up to 2% of GDP on defense, which is, a lot of billions of dollars. And we went to defense experts and people in the military, and we said, hey, it's Christmas Day. We're giving you this money. What would you spend it on ideally? And we were expecting a really fun piece out of that. But their brains were so not in the mode of just offering up things to buy. It was like, well, you would have to reprofile this, and the budgetary stuff on this would have to be X, and we'd have to do that. And we were hoping they would just say tanks or fighter jets or something like that. But it just shows you how tough it is to actually get these people to buy something. And when the politics gets involved, it makes it even worse. So, the cancellation, I think, would be a nightmare.
Let's talk about a couple of cleanup things at the end here. We have a new speaker. Francis Scarpaleggia, Liberal MP from Montreal, defeated a fellow Quebec Liberal, Greg Fergus from Gatineau. Despite knowing both of them for a long time, I'm actually quite happy about this because I thought Fergus was a disaster as a speaker. Very nice man, or I knew him as a very nice man before politics. He was ill-suited to speaker. Scarpaleggia, as I said in a video for The Sun last week, what do you need to know about him? He's boring. And that's a good thing for a speaker, I would argue. What are your thoughts on the change?
It is like the referee in a soccer game or a football game. The less you think about him and the less you see him, the better. And I think that's actually what everybody wants. I think that even, conservatives, liberals, were all a little bit tired of Fergus and just the kind of tomfoolery that was going on in the House. Like, it was getting on everyone's nerves and they were all blaming each other. And I think taking a little bit of the steam out of that would be good for everyone. Yeah,
I agree entirely with that, with what Stuart said. That I don't know him well, but I've known him around Parliament for 20 plus years, I guess. I liked his allusions to ancient Greece and how we're Athens and the US is Rome. I don't know whether that was meant to allude to the decline of Rome, but I think he's probably got the right stuff. He obviously knows Parliament inside out. He's well respected, and Stuart's absolutely right. He is a very beige man.
But that's good. Now, I'll ask you both for your thoughts on this. John first, Stuart second. There was Chris, I hope I'm saying his last name right, Chris d'Entremont, Conservative from Nova Scotia. I thought that if he had stayed in, that he was going to win because the Liberals might have been like, yes, we'll take a Conservative off the board. Let's back him. Get rid of Fergus. Why do you think the party? It looks like the party pressured him to drop out.
Well, I mean, it for that arithmetic reason, precisely because of that, it gives them a better chance, I guess, in their eyes of defeating the government at some point. Not that I suspect they have any intention of defeating the government or any desire to. I mean, all parties need to lick their wounds and rebuild their coffers. So there's not going to be an election anytime soon. But that's obviously with that in mind. Another example of the Conservative Party's central planning authority, it would seem to be. If this guy wants to be the Speaker, then let him be the Speaker, or at least let him run to be the Speaker. So I think there's a lot of discontent on Conservative backbench, not least with the fact that they're not in government. And these kind of decisions are not going to help that.
And with the fact that they were basically pylons during the election. Stuart?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And this is brewing. I don't think that Pierre Poilievre is in any immediate trouble, but there's a lot of stories going around conservative circles about how mean the central authority is, about how, whether it's Poilievre, whether it's Jenny Byrne, campaign manager, whether it's other people around them. I think they've just rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and that's because they were winning by so much for so long, and it's easy to do that when you're in the lead. But I think people are sort of thinking about this, like, why are we going to put up with 3 more years of however long this minority government lasts of being shunted aside? And d'Entremont told the National Post on, I think it was the Friday, on the record that, yeah, I'll be in the speaker race. And then he was sort of mysteriously taken off on Sunday when they were having their caucus meeting. So it's pretty obvious what happened there. And as I said, I don't think there's any immediate threat here, but people are upset. And the more they're annoyed and the less things change, the worse it gets for Poilievre.
All right, final point. We started with the cane. Let's end with the cane. The Governor General's office tweeting and then deleting a post that said a photo of the GG meeting with the king and said something about great of our two nations working together or bringing the two nations together. Shouldn't the Governor General's office know, even if it's a lowly comms person at the junior level, shouldn't they know that he's the king of Canada and this is not about bringing Britain and Canada together?
Yeah, it's the one thing you should know in that office. Like, it's not like you're in the industry department and you have a whole bunch of files you have to know. But I think we were chatting about that in the office, and we were trying to imagine the Mark Carney GG pick, which will be upcoming. And I bet you can expect the most boring GG of all time, because that's the opposite of what Trudeau did. Trudeau tried to make a PR splash with his picks, and sometimes you pay a price for that.
I actually think the Julie Payette pick started with someone sitting around the table sounding like Beavis and Butthead saying, "Boss, it'd be cool." And, because they didn't vet anything. John, your quick thoughts on the GG's office not knowing.
Yeah, well, that is a kind of blooper, I suppose. I hadn't even thought about a new GG. I mean, when does the current GG's office end?
Is that soon, Stuart?
I hesitate to say it on this podcast because we were just shooting the shit in the office, but I believe it's next year.
Okay,
right,
2026.
I mean, that will be fascinating, because the Julie Payette thing was so Trudeau, and I remember speaking to somebody, let's say close to him, who said we've got a choice is too spectacular to turn down. Vetting required. Nobody checked into the fact that she'd had this very checkered history, so it will be somebody who is extremely well vetted.
Yeah. I mean, she was responsible for a strike in a federal government department. They didn't know about that. It took the media 45 minutes to Google that she had been involved in an accident that killed a blind woman, and then, domestics and all kinds of stuff. Within an hour, all of this was out about Julie Payette. That I do not think that will happen with the Mark Carney pick. Gents, thanks for this. We will chat again soon, I am sure.
Yep.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks a lot.
Full Comment is a Postmedia podcast. This episode was produced by Andre Prue. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libben is the executive producer. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. Please make sure that you're hitting the subscribe button. Leave us a rating. Give us a review. Tell your friends and family about us. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
Here's that clip from Canada Did What? I promised you. Castro would end up occupying a space in the Trudeau family similar to that of a beloved uncle. They went diving. They smoked cigars together. They gathered sea urchins for beach cookouts.
Informal talks at an island hideaway intensified their respect for each other, and their mutual enjoyment of skin diving added to the rapport.
In addition to a well-publicized 1976 summit meeting, Trudeau took 3 separate vacations to visit Castro after his time in politics had ended.
I can make, just one reference to Pierre Trudeau's sons to show the closeness of the relationship. The nickname that the Trudeau sons had for Fidel Castro was Papa Fidel. So that gives you an indication of the closeness of the bond that existed between a communist dictator, thorn in the side of every American administration for the past 50 years, and Pierre Trudeau.
When Trudeau's youngest son, Michel, died in an avalanche in 1998, Castro called the family in tears to express his condolences. As an 8-year-old, Michel had referred to Fidel Castro as his best friend. When Pierre died, Fidel declared 3 days of mourning in Cuba and flew to Montreal to act as an honorary pallbearer.
Every time Trudeau went down to Cuba, all the people in South Florida, the exiles, were thinking, why is this Western leader giving comfort to a murderous dictator, who is oppressing their people in Cuba, and saying, good things about Fidel Castro? And as I've mentioned, to have him in the pew at Trudeau's funeral in the front row, as a dignified person, when he had been such a brutal leader, says more about Pierre Trudeau than it does about Fidel Castro.
Here's where we should probably touch on what Castro had done and what he was continuing to do while going on beach vacations with the Trudeau family.
If you want to hear the rest of the story, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What everywhere you get your podcasts.